How are you feeling? Maybe we shouldn't be asking that question right at the beginning of the year. I was, as Robin and I were preparing the webinar, I'm like, do we really want to ask these nurses how they're feeling? And that could be dangerous territory. But you're having your feelings. We're all having our feelings, so we might as well get comfortable talking about them. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Brackett, and I am a professor at Yale, and I am the founder and director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. And I'm going to, Robin, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Robin Stern. I am the co-founder and associate director of the center, the Yale Center, and a psychoanalyst in private practice. And what really exciting for me today, meeting all of you, is that I've worked for about 7 years now with nurses through Yale New Haven Hospital and affiliates, and I just think you're all extraordinary for the work you do.
Yeah. So, John, I see you're there. John, do you want to say something? I know that you look like you're in commute, but just to because it's because of you and all the people at the union that we did this. So please.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'm parked. I'm in a parking lot pulled over for this webinar, but I'm glad that we were able to pull this together. It was a lot of work, and I appreciate the hard work that you guys at Yale have done on this. And I'm glad that we have quite a few people participating today. I think it's been a struggle for the bedside nurses, and I'm not at the bedside anymore, and I'm not sure I could go back to it. So my hat is off to them, and whatever we can do to help people, we want to do. So thanks.
All right, thank you, John. So welcome again, everybody, and the we're just going to jump right in. And as Robin and Erin mentioned, we really want this to be a conversation, not Mark and Robin's show where we just talk at you the entire hour. And so please, I know many of you are off camera, which is fine, but if you're on camera, if you want to say something, you can take your, just raise your hand and we'll call on you. And we'd like everyone to use the chat function, as much as you possibly can to kind of engage with us. Just a quick raise of hands, how many of you are familiar with our center's work on emotional intelligence, or how many of you have worked in a school where Ruler has been part of it? Anyone? Let's give a hands up. Okay, I see hands in different places. Great. So what we're going to do is take you on a roller coaster ride, because why not? One thing we wanted to just say is that if you are interested in going deeper in this work, you can go to both of our websites, actually. They're just our names, Mark Brackett or robinstern.com. And a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about today and what Robin will be speaking about today, it's nice when your colleague speaks about when we speak about each other's work. And so this particular presentation is rooted in a lot of what I wrote about in my book called Permission to Feel, and also our center's work on Ruler, which is now in over 400 schools across the state of Connecticut. And so if you're a nurse in a school, then that does this work, you would probably know of it. And then obviously you can stay connected with us on social media if that's something you like to do. The other thing I just want to mention is that if you want to go deeper after this webinar is over, there's a course that we have built, Robin and I and other colleagues at the center. That's a 10-hour course on emotion regulation during stressful times. And so that's always available to you until the end of the year. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Robin.
Thank you. So it's part of our practice to start with a quote that we like a lot, and this is one of them, and very appropriate for the moment. So I'll read it through twice, and please, if you want, close your eyes or follow along on the slide. And we're asking you to tell us in the chat room the piece of wisdom that you took away from the COVID experience that is ongoing as you listen to this quote. Once the storm is over, You won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. I'll read it again. Once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. Quote by Haruki Murakami. So what is a piece of wisdom that you are taking away from the storm you've lived over the last months, years? Thank you. Tell us in the chat room. Thank you. Alina, I'm stronger than I give myself credit. Keep a cool head, follow the science. Don't let the fear mongers get you. Life is short. You don't know how long you have on this earth, so live. Enjoy every moment. Other pieces of wisdom. I love these. Thank you. Someone, Lynn, saw this quote before at a conference and has made it, Lynn, you made it part of your signature. It's forced me to reevaluate my priorities.
Well, thank you all very much for that. You know, Rob, I don't know about you, but the one thing I always think about with this quote is gratitude. And you know, we ran that study during the pandemic on like the things that people are grateful for, um, and it's interesting. Most people were very, you know, self-focused on their. I'm grateful for my finances, my family, my health, and it made me think. You know, well, why aren't people saying they're grateful for the healthcare workers, right, who are, you know, putting themselves at risk every day to support people's health and wellness, and teachers and grocery store clerks and other people um, who you know are really behind the scenes in helping our nation heal and get better.
Well, thank you. And one of the things that I think about a lot is that things that we all, I think, take for granted every single day or did before the pandemic, like just walking closely next to a friend, walking down the street, or giving a hug to your relative. Those are extraordinary things now. Now that we have them back a little bit, people are like, wow, this is great. I can hug somebody. When 2.5 years ago, was it 2 years ago, we took it for granted. So those ordinary things are really extraordinary.
So the workshop is about emotions matter and emotion regulation. And for those of you who know the center's work, um, you will know the mood meter. And it's funny, you know, during the pandemic, I think our center, we must have done 150 workshops, you know, on healthy emotion regulation for people. And somebody said to me, "Aren't you sick of talking about the mood meter already?" And I said, "Kinda." Um, but at the, you know, the truth is, you know, some of us, all of us probably on this call, right, on this webinar, are so busy all the time that we often, like, how many of us really stop to reflect on how we're feeling? Like, honestly, you're in the middle of a pandemic, you're treating people, you're working your butts off. How many of you, honest raise of hands, like literally take the time to just pause and say, you know something? I need to check in with my feelings. We don't do it, right? Even though we're in the profession, we go, and then we check in with our feelings when we get home at the end of the day. And if you have kids or a family or dogs or whoever you live with or not, you know, you're kind of plastered. You want to just like bang your head against the wall, and then you're like, oh, now I have feelings. It's called burnout, stress, overwhelmed, exhaustion. And so I'd like us to take a moment and just go a little scientific. Here we have this tool that's deceptively simple, right? It's 4 colors. I mean, let's get real. You're not in kindergarten. And so how do we make this deep? Well, all of us have feelings from the moment we're up in the morning to the time we go to bed at night. And so I don't really want to know like how you've been feeling about life because that's like, you know, you can go see Robin in New York City in her private practice for that one. But what I'd like to know right here, right now, right, is on a scale from -5 to +5. It's the first couple of weeks of school. Where are you? Are you at -5, thinking to yourself, "Oh my goodness, you know, I don't want to go back to work." And maybe you don't. Maybe you work in a hospital, so it could be wherever your workplace is. +5, you're thinking to yourself, "Oh my goodness, this is the best moment of my life." From people's responses, I'm not getting the feeling that that's the case. On the y-axis, it says energy. How many of you have felt at some points during the pandemic completely depleted of your resources? Like you're just completely like sapped of your energy. That's -5. +5 is that you were so energized you can't contain it. Like you're just beyond full of energy. So to get ourselves going with the mood meter, what I want to start with is asking everyone to please type in their quadrant. What color are you in today? On the count of 1. 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Got some green, blue, blue, green, yellow, yellow, green, red, yellow, yellow, green. One of the things I think is kind of interesting in your role as nurses is how many students in a school or in a hospital come to you because they're in the yellow. Like your job is not like to meet people who are in the yellow generally, right? It's usually people who are in the red and blue, which I think is just interesting and difficult, right, to begin with. Somebody's saying no color. You're not even on the mood meter anymore. Now, obviously, if we go around speaking in color, people are going to think we're weird. We need language. And so I'd like everyone to convert their color quadrant to a specific feeling word. Can everyone take a moment and think about that? What's the word, the feeling that best describes your moment? I got drained, tired, frustrated, overwhelmed. Wait, but everybody was just in yellow and the green 2 seconds ago, and now I'm asking you for the word. Tired, exhausted, drained, overwhelmed, indifferent, stable, unsure, disheartened. Got some positivity in there. Frustrated and a little apathetic. Okay, so we're seeing some pretty strong, emotions. Um, what do you think about that, Robin?
I think it's not so surprising. It's a time that is very, that's full of tension, stress, pressure, and moments of joy as well. So I think that people who are exhausted and other people who are positive.
Yeah,
Disheartened from the stress over time. I think part of what we're seeing is the result of the overtime piece of stress.
yeah. So, like, part of this workshop, part of this webinar is about accurate identification of emotion, right? Like, are we really clear how we feel? Has anyone? I'm just curious. When I asked you to find the word, did anyone find that a little bit challenging, like to come up with the precise word? Some people are saying yes. Lynn, I see you're saying no. I'm very clear. I am overwhelmed and stressed. um, and I think for a lot of people, it is hard. Um, for some people, it isn't, and obviously, there's lots of variability.
And
Um,
sometimes it's hard to pick one feeling. Some people may be feeling exhausted, but also positive or hopeful for the future. And other people may not be feeling those two feelings, but others. I know when I was typing my feeling and I'm thinking, I'm pretty content right now. And also I'm positive and also
mhm.
I'm eager. And so there were a lot of things going on. So,
I have another question for all of you. How many of you feel like you work in an environment where your feelings matter? How many of you feel like um, it's like oftentimes we're the only ones who know how we're feeling? It's a weird thing to be, right, in a workplace with feelings. Robin, just ask me how I'm feeling.
Mark, how are you feeling today?
Fine. How many of you normally, when people ask you how you're feeling, you just say fine? Does that feel like the typical response? Robin, ask me again how I'm feeling.
Mark, how are you feeling?
Actually, Robin, I'm like, I'm bloated from my lunch. I'm irritable because I got too much stuff on my plate. I'm actually overwhelmed by all the stuff on my plate. I'm stressed out about the future, and I'm a little hopeless as well.
Well, I'm sorry about that. I thought you were eating.
Exactly, right? Because if you tell people the truth, right? Not that that's how I'm feeling, by the way. I mean, I'm leaking a little bit of my true self there,
Not
but
that that's how I'd respond, by the way.
yeah, thank you. But does this, I mean, we're getting at the point here of like our work, right? Your work as nurses, right? You're obviously you're in this work because you're compassionate people and you're listening to children a lot of the times and other adults, spewing and sharing what's going on for them. But how many of us really are in places where our feelings matter and people are concerned about our health and our well being? It's really challenging. Um, and it's just not really something that people have thought about, in terms of workplaces, where emotions really matter. Um, Now, the next is the following. Well, it's multiple. You will get distracted during Robin's and my presentation.
Mark, it's Erin. I think you're freezing
If
up
at
a
some
little
point
bit.
focus or get.
Mark, you're going in and out.
Oh, sorry.
Mark, can you just say a few things? You were cutting in and out.
Yeah, I'm gonna get better connect. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. What I said was, um, I was asking people about their distractibility. So, how many of you at some point, right, during this workshop, are going to lose focus, be tempted to do a text message, check your email, call, secretly put yourself on quiet so you can make a phone call or check social media? Just give me an honest in the chat room. How many of you? We got one spot on. Somebody else is guilty. Guilty. Another guilty. Me. Yes. Um, just did an email. God, all these authentic, honest nurses. It's fabulous.
Thank
The
you.
problem is that you're not paying attention to our presentation. Authenticity um, is a difficult place to be when you're a presenter. Um, and so that leads to the big question, which is, what are your strategies? You're taught to multitask. Yes, it's guilty, right? Hard to do one thing at a time. But one thing you should know about your brain, just to give you some brain science for a minute, your brain can really only pay attention to one thing at a time. We like to lie to ourselves and say, oh, I'm a great multitasker. The research does not support that we're very good at that. So my question to all of you is, what's your strategy to be present and get the most out of our workshop today? Let's hear those strategies in the chat. I'm not seeing anybody write any strategies.
Have you on full screen? Love that.
All right, so what are we seeing here? It's difficult to stay focused. I'm going to be transparent to a fault.
Force myself to be attentive. Wearing AirPods.
Trying to focus. I'm at home, away from work. Quick raise of hands. How many of you during this pandemic had a day where you were just like, I'm done. I can't take it anymore. Anyone? Like that meltdown where you're just like, I got no words, I got no strategies, I want to escape. And so, and everybody's like, only one.
Yeah.
How many of you worked with a colleague or a child who during the pandemic just had a complete meltdown emotionally? Yeah, everybody. Now, how many of you feel that in your education, to become a nurse or whatever your specific profession is, or in the school, if you're an educator in a school, a nurse in a school, how many of you feel like there's adequate attention to healthy emotion regulation? What do you think? Is there a lot of education on that in school, in your schools? Um, you know, it's not something that we've really spent a lot of time thinking about, our well-being, right? What are the research-based strategies to help regulate? And so we want to help you with that. And first is your cheat sheet. So this is your cheat sheet. These are all the words, right, to help us label our feelings accurately. Are we in the yellow feeling excited and ecstatic? Or are we in the green feeling calm and content? Are we in the blue feeling down or disappointed? Or are we in the red feeling overwhelmed, angry, or anxious? There are 2,000 words just in English language to describe our feelings. Most of us use 2. Fine, stressed. So what research shows, this is the way kids have been feeling during the pandemic. Just curious, does this resonate with you in terms of the kind of feelings that you've noticed in children? The number one emotion among adults is, type it into the chat. The number one emotion among adults is, you're close, anxiety. It's interesting. Years ago, we would get stressed, but now we get anxiety. Any thoughts about why anxiety would be more prevalent than the word stress during this difficult time? Someone can come off, and say something if you'd like. Why would all of a sudden stress used to be the number one word that adults would say they were feeling, and now it's anxiety? Yep, I think you got it all. It's the unknown. We're just living in this constant state of uncertainty. I have another question for you. Do you think it's the same strategy to manage stress as anxiety, or maybe a different strategy? What do you think? Might be different. And so, or might be the same. So stress is right about having too many demands, and not enough resources. Anxiety is about uncertainty around the future. They're different emotions. Most of us use these things interchangeably. We say we're stressed if we're anxious. We say we're anxious when we're stressed. And the truth is that we might use different strategies to help regulate the stress versus the anxiety. Now, when we ask people, how do you want to feel? The number one emotion right now, interestingly enough, is appreciation. Barbara, you asked me to repeat that. Stress is having too many demands and not enough resources, right? You got too much on my plate. I don't have enough people to support me. I can't take it anymore. That's stress. Anxiety is what's happening? Are people getting vaccinated or they're not getting vaccinated? Are we going back? Are we not going back? It's all the uncertainty. So different psychological experiences that would probably lead to different strategies. Number one emotion right now is appreciation. What do we think about that? Anyone, any thoughts about why appreciation might be the top hoped for emotion right now? Have none.
Mark, one of the things that I'm hearing, and everyone, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot about is that it, it feels even worse to not be appreciated right now, because during the pandemic, so many of the nurses I've worked with were validated, were getting appreciation, were getting gratitude, were getting free meals and massages and accolades all the time. And going back to normal, they're now feeling like all they are is a piece of data, that they're only as good as their last performance, or they're only as good as their last staffing. And they really are missing being appreciated even more so than they were before the pandemic.
Yeah. And I think also you know, your work is so other focused as nurses, right? That it's oftentimes like the expectation is your job is to help other people. But then like, where's the self, that's helping? The self oftentimes gets lost.
I see a couple of really important comments in here. One from Lynn, that we're not even back to normal. People have gone back the other way and are angry. Um,
We've seen that also in the work we do at the hospitals. There's a lot of anger among doctors and nurses because, people are not taking care of themselves, and right, if we would be in a better place if people took better care of themselves, for
Hey,
sure.
Mark, it's Lynn. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, please.
what I was meaning was the people we take care of, their parents, are like, forget being appreciated. We don't even want that. We just don't want people to be really mean and rude and nasty to us for stuff that we have to enforce, public health guidelines. And listen, we take being not acknowledged over the way we're being acknowledged.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so it's like criticism, harshness, as opposed to compassion, and understanding. Yeah.
And are you saying, just to clarify, that because you're enforcing the rules that we're not making, that are coming from the school or the state or the?
Yes, that's exactly it. And there's a level of fatigue in all of the parents that is just beyond anything we've ever seen, where they can't keep up with the the rules, and people are not telling the truth, and some people are being deceitful, and then people are being rude and angry and swearing and yelling, and it's like nothing I've ever seen.
Yeah. And so that brings up, go ahead, please. Who was going to say something?
I was just saying I was so sorry to hear that, and it's so unfortunate and so unfair that you've become the enemy.
Yeah. So we better do something about it right now. And what we can at least try to do, and this is actually something I think is quite important around this appreciation. Oftentimes when we don't feel this way, it becomes kind of a blaming game. If you did this, I would feel appreciated. And I think one way around that is in our workplaces is to create a community mindset around appreciation. Like, what can we all do together in our workplace to ensure that everyone feels appreciated? And I know it's been hard for me as a leader and Robin as a leader of a large group and just trying to be a little bit of a role model, right? For that. And maybe that becomes contagious, So maybe we can be the first to create the positive contagion as opposed to the first, that with that kind of unpleasant negative contagion. But it sounds pretty clear to us, that we're emotionally out of balance. That we got a lot of blue and red, and we got people who say they want to feel yellow and green. I think this brings up, something that is at the heart of what we're going to talk about, which is at the heart of our work at the center, which is this general concept of giving ourselves the permission to be our true, full feeling selves. When I was writing my book called Permission to Feel, there was a lot of pushback about the title. They're like, "Oh, that sounds too soft, and people are going to be uncomfortable if you talk about this concept of permission to feel." And then I pushed back and I said, "But like, how many of us feel like we have the permission to be our true, full feeling selves?" Oftentimes, we have to go through life showing emotions that we're not experiencing. Something we'll talk about in a little while.
Mark, it's interesting because I wonder if you'd share the story of your uncle, who was the person who gave you the permission to feel.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for those of you, I actually was, in the spirit of being fully transparent, I have 100 memories of being in the nurse's office in my elementary school. I was a kid who had a lot of challenges. I was abused as a kid by a neighbor, and my sexual abuse, which went on for way too many years from the ages of 5 to 10, was not disclosed. And what happened? It got manifested in physical health problems, in depression, and anxiety, in self hatred, in stomach aches, in all the things that all of you know in your profession. And, you know, I was blessed that I had this uncle who was my mother's brother, who essentially was the first adult in my life who knew me and asked me that simple yet profound question, which was, "How are you feeling?" But did it in a way that got me to be safe and comfortable to talk about my experiences. And, we've gone on in the center to think about, well, who are these people that give people the permission to feel? And just take a look at these adjectives: compassionate, empathic, non judgmental, supportive, caring, attentive, encouraging, patient. I mean, let's be real, it sounds like the characteristic of a fantastic nurse, doesn't it?
So
Uh,
we have a question for all of you. When you think back over your lifetime, do you have an Uncle Marvin or someone else, a friend, family member, a colleague, who gave you the permission to feel? Someone with whom you felt like it was okay to have your feelings. Tell us in the chat room. Who gave you the permission to feel?
grandmother, coworker. Think broadly. It could have been a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a coach, a teacher.
Your own kids, other nurses.
It's funny, Lori, a lot of people, say that. They say, I didn't have an Uncle Marvin. Um, and I want to just say up front, that over time we realize that we can be our own Uncle Marvins, right? That we have to give ourselves, right, that permission to be our true, fulfilling selves.
And we
Um,
also have the opportunity, especially as nurses and models for kids we serve, to be other people's Uncle Bob, to be that person in someone else's life who gives them the permission to feel.
and so part of it is okay, um, if you get the time, yeah. That's the part, right? We have to include ourselves in the circle of the people that we care about, right? How many of you have lost yourself during the pandemic caring for everyone else except for yourself? Does that anyone relate to that? And it's in many ways, I'm going to say this, it's our moral obligation, right, to take care of ourselves, because if we're not in a good place psychologically or we don't have our wellness, we're not going to be the best possible parents, teachers, nurses, co-workers either. Because we know from research that how you feel matters for everything. Um, everything. And so it's not the Mark and Robin opinion show, right? It's the science show, which is that we know from research that emotions are at the core of what it means to be a human. I'm sure you've worked with a child who was having strong anxiety or fear, and how many of you ever worked with a child who had strong emotions like that and was and they were suffering academically because of it? And it wasn't because of their cognitive ability or their creativity. I was a C and D student. I was a failing student as a kid. I know it's hard to believe because I'm so smart, but the truth is, I was a failing student, and I always thought I was, I'm going to be blunt here. I always thought I was stupid and dumb as a kid, which is a terrible thing to think about yourself. And then only when I became a scientist did I realize, Mark, the reason why you were unable to learn is because you were in fight or flight mode every day at school. You were in survival mode, not learning mode. I think we as adults during the pandemic have also gotten into survival mode too, where we can't flourish ourselves because we're just trying to just basically survive. Decision making, relationships, physical and mental health. How many of you have worked in more than one location in your career? Like more than one job? A lot of you? Like multiple schools or multiple hospitals? Have any of you ever worked in an environment where there was a lot of kind of negativity? Like you might call it, some people call it a toxic workplace environment, or where the relationships were not so great. Anyone ever notice that when you work in an environment like that, it affects your personal stress levels and well-being? And in turn, your ability to do your work well? And so when you think about feelings at work, it's never just one person's feelings. It's always about the community's feelings. And so part of the goal is to help not only think about an individual, but think about the group. All right, so now's the hard part because we're going to get to talk about you. Robin?
If you look at the list on the left and the list on the right, you'll see two categories that really reflect a mindset, a way you approach emotions in yourself and in other people, even before you use your any skills or strategies. We have these concepts. Emotion scientists is someone who accepts all emotions, give yourself the permission to feel. See emotions as coming and going. You're open and curious and reflective, and you're the learner. You want to get granular, you want to be specific about emotions, and you always want to have a growth mindset. An emotion judge, in contrast, views emotions as a weakness and sees emotions in a very fixed way. You can meet somebody where you think that person is just always angry. And that's it. You put them in a frame and you see them in that way, and that's your definition of that person. That person is, an emotion judge is critical and closed and is a knower rather than a learner, and a clumper rather than somebody who sees emotions in a more granular way. Clumpers think of emotions as good or bad in a fixed mindset. So when you look at this list, the one on the left, an emotion scientist, and the one on the right, think for a minute about when or who, what or who in your work environment leads you to be an emotion scientist or an emotion judge. What brings out the emotion scientist in you or the emotion judge? Is it a person? Is it a particular task you have to do? Post in the chat room. Or just throw it out.
Robin, as you say this, I'm thinking I'm an emotion scientist with acquaintances and strangers, and I'm an emotion judge with everybody who lives in my house. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I don't think it's an uncommon experience. You know, we're hardest on the people we love. We're hardest on the people, most critical on the people we live with, including ourselves.
I know when someone else is feeling anxious, I'm like, take a deep breath, think about it. When I feel anxious, I'm like, Mark, you're the freaking director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence.
Right.
Get over it.
So what are people saying in the chat room? Let's see.
Right. It's in when you're in it, you kind of judge, and then you come out of it, and you can be the scientist.
Emotion scientist with everyone except my family. What are you doing?
Which brings up another interesting question, right, Robin? Which is the barriers, right? So, why do we become the judge with the people that we're supposed to care about the most?
Yeah, I mean, do we want to be an emotion scientist or a judge, right? We all want to be, hopefully, an emotion scientist. So as Mark is asking, what's the barrier? What's in your way? People you love and are close to. Moments where you let your emotions.
Your guard down.
I mean, I hear from people all the time, well, why should I be inauthentic at home? Why shouldn't I just be my authentic self, right? Because home is where you let your emotional guard down. But how about still having a mindset of acceptance and curiosity and things that are helpful, like being a learner rather than a judge and a knower? I'm a judge so I don't have to dig beneath the surface.
It's interesting with that, right? Because with the judge, you don't have to. You just, you know, you just attribute. You make.
Oh, you move on, right?
Yeah. Get over it. It's a lot easier than saying, "Oh my goodness, tell me how you're feeling." No, really, tell me how you're feeling. I have to listen, right? Because when you think about it, Robin, when you ask me how I'm feeling, a few things happen, right? One is I'm going to respond to you based on my belief in my relationship with you, right? Like if I don't think you care, I'm probably just going to say fine. And then if I tell you how I'm really feeling, there's an expectation that you're going to actually care and listen and that you're going to be supportive.
Well, and even if I'm saying something to you or you're saying something to me that is not about, that doesn't really pull on our relationship at all, what if you're coming into that moment where you're distracted and you don't really want to bring out the patience inside of you that you might bring out with somebody you weren't disposed to?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the barrier is taking it all for granted.
Stress is a barrier, I think, for a lot of people, right? You're depleted of your resources at the end of the day, and you're just sort of like, I'm not going to process anymore. I'm done.
Or being tired, same thing, you're just done.
I have a question for everyone. How many of you have ever worked for someone who is an emotion judge? And anyone ever have a boss who was an emotion judge? someone who wasn't as mindful or careful or interested in emotion. Our research shows that it's really hard to work for people who are emotion judges, because they're just not interested in you as an individual. They're not curious about you as the person. All right, so let's think about what we've gotten so far. And remember, this is a three-part series. This is your opening act. We get to go a lot deeper, right, over the next couple of weeks as we do these webinars. So first step, we've got to be aware of our feelings. That's why we have a tool like the mood meter. But even probably before that, we've got to give ourselves that permission to feel, right? No such thing as a good or bad emotion. Emotions are experiences. Happy days, like when it's sunny out, look out because there might be a rainy day tomorrow. Rainy days when you get lost in the flood, guess what? Tomorrow will be sunny out. So emotions are ephemeral, they're impermanent. And then we're going to strive to be those emotion scientists, the curious explorers. So for example, going back to that example we did earlier, anxiety versus stress. Who remembers the difference? What's the psychological difference between anxiety and stress? Anyone? Colleen, you've had your hand up forever. I think, did you want to say something? If you do, you may come off mic or mute. Or if anyone else, who's going to share the difference? Anxiety involves the unknown. And stress is?
Well, I think stress is more like a response to the feeling in a way for me, and anxiety is just sort of this generalized, hard to really concretely pinpoint, just like a free floating feeling for me anyway.
Mm-hmm. So let's think about it, right? When the pandemic first hit, we're all at home in March of 2020, and like, no more toilet paper, everyone's in quarantine, the stock market's crashing, right? You know, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's all like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Do we have any control over this? It's like anxiety happens when we have little control and we see all the uncertainty. Whereas stress is when we got, right, too much on our plates and we don't have enough support to get it all done. Does that resonate with everybody?
Mark, someone has a hand up. Janet?
Janet, please.
Oh, I just hit it by accident.
No
I'm trying to
worries.
get it down. Sorry.
Doesn't matter. All good. So what if I were to say, now I would add in fear? How do we, what if we added fear to the list? And we added pressure to the list? Are there differences? Are there no differences? Fear is, will this ever end? What's the theme behind fear? Anyone? Negative outcomes. So fear is about danger, right? Like, I'm afraid to go into that environment because maybe people are not masked. I'm afraid to go into that environment because I don't want to get sick. That's not anxiety, right? It's if it's based on your, and you feel like you're at risk or in danger, right? That's going to be fear. What about pressure? Pressure, what's pressure got to do with it? Good, Jennifer, asking too much of me, right? Fear is when, I mean, pressure is when it's all about your performance and people have too many expectations, you know, you don't feel, and that your performance is at stake. So why would Robin and I want you to like get granular with your feelings? Like, why would we be spending so much time on this first session saying anxiety is about uncertainty, fear is about danger, stress is having too many demands and not enough resources, fear is about danger, pressure is about something at stake is dependent upon your performance?
so we can process them and then work through them and get to the other side.
Yeah, because if we don't label our feelings properly, we oftentimes don't regulate them effectively. Does that make sense to people? That labeling it accurately is a pathway towards healthy emotion regulation?
And also a pathway towards effective communication.
Exactly. So if I say to Robin, you know, I'm stressed, and she thinks, oh, let me take stuff off Mark's plate, but I'm actually anxious, she's probably not going to help me with the root cause, of my actual feeling.
Right, and then you're not likely to feel seen by me or understood by me. When actually we just had a missed opportunity because of mislabeling the feeling.
Here's an interesting example. So at Yale, where Robin and I work, in a class I was teaching years ago for students, they all said they were stressed. And so they were all going to the doctor and the nurse to get treatment. They were doing mindfulness and yoga classes, which, can help. And then I had them do an exercise where they had to describe the reasons for their stress. Anyone want to guess what the number one emotion was among the students? The actual emotion? What do you think it was? Pressure, anxiety. Everybody look in the chat. You're not going to believe it. It was... Oh, I just sent it to Robin. Envy. So they were being treated. They were being, quote unquote, treated for stress when their actual psychological experience, that was their envy, Lori, was, this family has more money than my family. This kid doesn't have to study as much as I have to study to get good grades. This father has more connections. This mother is more this. Everybody's better than me. Everybody's better looking than me. Everybody's got more resources than I do. That's envy, right? That's endless social comparison. But they were all saying they were stressed. The university's response was breathing exercises, yoga. And I am a believer in both of those, by the way. And I remember saying, like, where's the research which shows that downward dog reduces envy? It was not very popular that week. But do people get what we're trying to do here now? Is this like this specificity? Sometimes I'm funny, Barbara. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to wrap up now by just sharing with you where we're going next. Robin, you want to just talk with them a little bit about how we're going to take them through the skills, mostly of healthy emotion expression and regulation during the following webinars?
Sure. So as the slide says, the ruler skills are recognizing emotions in self and others, understanding causes and consequences of emotions, labeling emotions accurately, which are the RUL is the experience of emotions, and then expressing and regulating, which are the active part of emotional intelligence. And we're going to be spending the next webinar on expressing and regulating emotions. What do we do when we know we have emotions? So today we talked about recognizing emotions in ourselves. We talked about the underlying causes of some emotions and labeling accurately. So we're going to be moving into what does it mean to express emotions, and particularly what does it mean to be expressing your emotions on the job, and how do you regulate? And we'll share with you next time the big 7 strategies that we have, the different buckets and the different strategies within those buckets that help you day to day on your job, at home, in between, regulate your emotions.
Great. So your homework, because, this is education, right? You're not getting away with nothing. Your homework between now and our next webinar is when you check in with yourself, maybe using a tool like the mood meter, and you say you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, is to ask yourself, is that really the feeling that I'm having? Or might there be a more specific emotion, right, that I'm actually experiencing based on my circumstances. So we're just going to ask you to play with your emotion language over the next couple of weeks as your first stage in becoming an emotion scientist. And on that note, just want to say thank you for joining us in the beginning of the year in September at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to be yet on another freaking Zoom meeting, nevertheless, to talk about feelings. And grateful that you all made the time for this. And may you have a wonderful rest of the evening. And we very much look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, go ahead.
Look forward to seeing you next time, and thank you for the work you're doing in the world.
And let your colleagues know. Share the secret. Mahalo. If you're from Hawaii, I'm totally envious of you. And it looks like somebody might be, and that's amazing. And I say that we get the union to pay for all of us to do this next workshop in Hawaii.
That sounds like homework for the union.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful rest of the evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks
Thank
so
you, Erin. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.